All right, we'll start the show. We are Talisman and Coiner. We're out of Hagerstown, Maryland, and we're trying to advance numismatics through storytelling and showing how money can tell many stories beyond just face value of a coin. So, Becky, if you would. Today, we're going to be talking about all the different exploits that are connected with the fall of the Confederacy at the time when U.S. Grant actually caused Richmond to fall, and we'll get into where the flight of the Confederate treasure train actually went. Now, the second book that we have created is called The Sumptuous Southern Stories of Missing Confederate Money. And there are enormous legends, many of which are basically fairy tales, about where all the Confederate money went. Most of the money, in our opinion, was from the Richmond Banks. And we'll also go a step further and suggest that the money was also from the Knights of the Golden Circle, which opens up another door of where great wealth was accumulated to try to resurrect the South, especially if Jeff Davis could make it over to Texas. Now, here's the deal. We're going to follow this little train, which also becomes a wagon train, loaded with cash, from Richmond down to Danville, into Greensboro, Charlotte, which there was a mint there at the time, down to a little town called Abbeville, which is called the birthplace and the deathbed of the Confederacy. And then they made it in a perilous way across a pontoon bridge down into Georgia, and we'll kind of watch where the money got scattered here and there. Over here, we'll start when April 2nd, when the town of Richmond fell, and they traveled as far as Danville, which became the capital for a while. Alrighty, April 2nd, 1865, basically Robert E. Lee's army falls to U.S. Grant. The town is bombarded, people are evacuate, taking every bit of their earthly possessions with them. However, the very wealthy and the very prominent, they are able to leave on several trains on the Danville line. So when they get to Danville, this train, there may actually have been as many as 8 of these trains. Depends on what account that you read. And we've seen plenty of evidence that there were decoy trains with empty strong boxes on board. Anyway, they get down to Danville. They still have $450,000 in gold and bullion from the Richmond Banks. They have anywhere from $85,000 and more in gold from the Confederate Treasury, plenty of silver, a lot of what they call scrapings from the 3 mints in the South that they took over. But here's the biggest deal. 40 barrels of silver coin, mostly Mexican reals, were taken off the train. Ostensibly, they were taken to the Bank of Danville, and they were supposed to be exchanged at the rate of $70 of paper Confederate money for every $1 in silver for the general population. Of course, the further the little trains went south, the less value that paper money had, and by the time they got to the end of the line, the paper money was worth absolutely nothing. So at least some people ostensibly got an exchange rate of 70 to 1 with their money. Now, where it gets really interesting is there's been a rumor, a legend if you would, that in one of the cemeteries where the wealthier white folks are buried, it's rumored that 30 of the 40 barrels, each containing about $5,000 in silver, intended for Robert E. Lee, but he never got the dough, and he, again, by April 9th, he had surrendered to Grant. They believe that the money is buried at the site of the grave of Robert S. Jones, a lieutenant with the 18th Virginia Infantry. The grave site apparently has 1 grave, but there's enough room for 10 bodies. No one can account for that. And everybody who was asked to do any kind of metal detecting or any other kind of search has been declined for decades. So the first stop where there may be $150,000 or more in silver is at the gravesite of Robert S. Jones. Anyway, I've already told the story, but I'll go right ahead. They would move the money off the trains in that kind of a barrel. like a whiskey barrel, and 40 were rolled off the train, and only 10 came back to the train. And they believe that, the official records say that the money was, again, transferred or exchanged at 70 to 1, but many people believe it's all buried in the Greenville cemetery. And just to make one thing very clear, the trains were still parked in Danville when Robert E. Lee officially surrendered to Grant. And at that point, they realized that the South was collapsing all around them. The money was becoming less valuable. The next stop would be, ironically, to meet with a fellow by the name of General Johnston, who was the commander of the Army of Tennessee. Johnston picks up $39,000 in silver Mexican reals, and he, according to some people, was supposed to transport it safely down to Charlotte for Davis, but he was a little angry, shall we say, at the powers that be. He never got along with Jeff Davis, and he decided to distribute that $39,000 to his troops, of which there were about 32,000 men camped in the Greensboro area, and every man somehow got $1.17, which is about $30 today, to try to get home. Now, they didn't have any pennies, nickels, and dimes, so what do? I understand there was a lottery, and every seventh man would get a second dollar, and then they'd go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, and that's how somehow you get $1.17. Now, on the left, we wanted to show you a railroad, called the General, the type of locomotive that the treasure train was. That is the embodiment. And you can see some horses, some people attending to the engine. Basically, it would stop along the way and make meetings with people and distribute money. In this case, General Johnston. On April the 7th, he picks up his $39,000. April 26th, he surrenders to William T. Sherman in the little town of Durham, which at that time was 400 people, and a tobacco depot. Now it's like, what, 40,000 people? It's one of the fastest growing towns around. So maybe they just left some of that cash behind. That little town really took off. And Bull Durham, if you guys remember the cigarettes called Bull Durham, that came from that little town because the Confederate soldiers liked the tobacco so much that they kept coming back for it, and that little company, that little quiet town of Durham became quite a bustling tobacco area in the late 1800s. Go ahead, Beck. Now, here's the numismatic part of the story. I don't know how many of these were struck, but thanks to Wayne, we can show you this engraving from General Joseph E. Johnston, and that was part of the payroll, the final payroll. And this particular coin was handed out on May the 1st of 1865, the last payroll that Johnston administered. Now, I don't know, Wayne, do you have any idea how many were actually engraved of the 39,000 that he actually received?
There are many different types,
right?
Multiple types, but it's in like a handful or a dozen.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a beautiful generic coin from Johnston to his men. Go ahead, Becco. Now this is a little bit more elaborate, and I do want to thank David Hill of ANS who provided these images, and then we researched it a little bit further. Here you can see very clearly that they were considered souvenirs of the lost cause, the last payment of the Confederate government. These were created or struck well after the war was over, and it was not a generic coin like the one you just saw. But here you have a Liberty seated coin, and it has a very, very elaborate engraving, and it was to an assistant surgeon at Charlotte, North Carolina, and it was given by General Joseph F. Johnson, commander. This, of course, is again a Mexican coin, and it is very carefully engraved. Souvenir of the lost cause. It was for a fellow by the name of P.P. Parker, and he was with Company C of the 17th North Carolina Regiment, and he mustered out at High Point, North Carolina, April 26, 1865. So these are both Mexican coins, which the Treasury had because they were able to do business with Mexico when they couldn't get their cotton to England or France. They could continue to go inland and sell cotton throughout the war to Mexico. So the Confederate Treasury had Mexican reals, as opposed to very many silver dollars from New Orleans, for example. But these are absolutely beautiful. I did learn, by the way, on that one particular coin that you saw, the medallion, that sold at auction for $12,000, I believe, in roughly 2012. So it's a very, very desirable kind of a memento of the war. The next stop, of course, was Charlotte, North Carolina. This is the Mint. Becky and I took a little, we call our Dixie Dash. We went to North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, and retraced a lot of the places that the train went. And we, of course, visited the Mint. Everything was taken off of the train in very late in April, and stored at the Mint, which had not been active since 1861. So it became a big bank vault for the Confederate Treasury and the Richmond Bank trove. And the little coin there, which we'll show you a couple more, but they only struck gold coins in Charlotte, and they are lovely coins. They are, the Mint got its ore from local gold mines. A lot of people don't realize that there was a gold rush in Georgia and North Carolina and South Carolina long before California or Oregon, way back. Now, things got a lot dicier for the wagon train as they went further south. Sherman had torn up a lot of track. They got as far as Chester, South Carolina, and they had to take everything off the train, put it into ambulances, wagons, anything that could roll. They made it to Newberry, South Carolina. They managed to put it back onto a train for about 40 miles. Then they came to the little town of Abbeville on May 2nd. Now, here's where it gets interesting. They did run into a lot of places where the wagons got stuck. Gold is extremely heavy, and they also had about $600 million in paper money and bonds, which were becoming more and more worthless as the further south they went. And they started to have to ditch some of this stuff. And we'll get into where some of it might have gone, but the most interesting story for me, and something you guys haven't probably heard very much about, I certainly didn't, there was a little town called Vienna, South Carolina, along the Savannah River, and on the other side was Petersburg, Georgia. And there was just a pontoon bridge going between the two, and taking 4,000 or 5,000 pounds of gold and wagons across a pontoon bridge, across a river as big as the Savannah, is very dicey. So there were a lot of rumors. Old folks would tell stories that a lot of the money was left behind at either Fort Charlotte, which is a little bit south of Vienna, or Vienna. But in 1954, a power dam was built a little bit downstream, and now Vienna, Petersburg, and Lisbon are all under 40 feet of water. So if gold had been left behind before they were going across that pontoon bridge, I'd bet my bottom dollar that if you could get your scuba gear and go to Vienna, you might find something. Now, the problem is the dam was authorized by Uncle Sam, and everything that's underwater is federal property. It doesn't belong to the state. So if you want to go scuba diving and look for gold in what was once Vienna, South Carolina, you're going to have to get Uncle Sam to go along with it, and you'd have to turn over, theoretically, everything that you find to the federal authorities. Now, this is a really interesting story. This we learned just by going to Washington, Georgia, and that's, of course, where the treasure train finally was captured by the Union after it scooted over to Augusta, and it scooted toward Macon, and it came back again. Bottom line is, in the little library in Washington, there's this enormous chest. It's iron, and it's incredibly strong and extremely heavy, and it had been in the branch building of the Georgia Bank when it was demolished in 1902. And it was bequeathed to the town. The town has been taking care of it ever since the early 1900s. No one had ever opened it, and everyone said, God, could have this been with the treasure train? And then one day, according to everything I've read in the 1920s, An 80-year-old guy comes walking into the library, and he looks at that chest and he says, God, I protected that chest when I was 20 and I was in the Confederate Army, and there were 2 others just like it, and yes, that was on the Confederate treasure train. I protected the damn thing. So, what did they do, Becky? They opened it. I'm sorry, you were right, Becky, my fault. They hired a locksmith, the Atlanta Journal, I believe it was, said, this is a really good story. This is like the big reveal. So they hired talent to come in and carefully open the box. They found that what they thought was where you put a key in the front there was a fake. It was a ruse. It had nothing to do with opening the box. It was actually on the top, hidden by a metal slat. And the guy found he broke several tools, the locksmith. He really went at it carefully, but with a lot of strength, and finally the thing popped open. And all they found inside was one Jefferson nickel from 1939 in beautiful shape. Now, there are lots of explanations. First of all, no one really thought it would be still loaded with gold. I mean, obviously, that would have been part of the Richmond Bank trove, and that went over back to the Savannah River where most of it was stolen. But there's also another angle to it, and that is, and we'll get to this as part of the story, Jefferson Davis had a lieutenant named Micaiah Clark, who was his, I don't know, I call him his faithful steward. Anything that Jeff Davis wanted to have done, Micaiah would do it for him. And Micaiah took money and private papers of Davis's from Washington, Georgia, south into Florida. He was not captured, but on his wagon, in his memoirs, he had a large iron chest that he carried with him down to Gainesville, Florida. There he had to surrender, paroled himself, came back, and according to his own memoirs, he went to Washington, Georgia, retrieved papers from a box, went back into Abbeville, South Carolina, retrieved more private state secrets of the Confederacy, and then went on his way. And no one bothered him. But there are many different stories that go along with that box, and let's just keep going. Now, here's where I'm going to jump around a little bit. Last spring at Penn, we were giving a similar talk, and when I talked about the fact that on the train there were a lot of copper coins, but there weren't, no one specified how many or how they were packed. You know, it said $86,000 in gold, $36,000 in Mexican reals, and lots of pennies. So, okay, all right. This is the literal, manifest. So Ed, who works on the floor, had come up to me and he said, well, have you ever heard of the Randall Hoard? I said, I've heard of it, but what's the connection? He said, well, there's barrels of big old coins, of pennies, large cents. They were found at a Georgia railroad depot when they were overhauling that thing right after the war. This is a great illustration out of one of the books that I do a lot of referencing to. This is the depiction of how these guys, the Confederates, with young men that were from the Department of Navy protecting the train, studying the manifest, looking at what coins are on board, etc. And this is how the treasure train was depicted, by the way, leaving Richmond. People apparently climbed onto every single bit of the locomotives. They were on the cow catcher, they were on the top of the roofs until they were basically chased off. But when those trains were leaving Richmond and going through Danville, a lot of people caught a ride to go as far south as they possibly could. The Randall Hoard, and I guess, Wayne, you probably know a lot about that, right? I mean, so you can tell me if this is just a stretch or not. But there are thousands of large copper cents, large pennies, found at a railroad station in Georgia, and it turns out that the Confederate treasure train was put onto the Georgia Railroad and Banking Company train in Washington. They went to Augusta. They were chased out of Augusta and came back to Washington. They tried to get to Macon. They were routed there, had to come back, and eventually were captured. But the bottom line is, I think that there's a great chance that the money was part of the Randall Hoard, because what would be the very first thing you get rid of? A barrel full of gold or a barrel full of pennies? It weighs the same, but the value is like, there's no comparison. And they were ditching things left and right to it all became ballast after a point. Go ahead, Beck. And this is just one of the samples. I think all of them were dated 1818 through 1820. Does that sound right? They were all in really very fine shape. They've been sitting in barrels underground for years until they were dug up and everyone wondered where they come from. And the name Randall was the coin dealer that bought them. It had nothing to do with the train station or any place in Georgia. So we're going to use this as a little segue to talk about the Georgia Railroad and Banking Company for a number of reasons. First of all, they played an enormous role to help the Confederacy during the war, and they became one of the most powerful banks in Georgia, mainly because they had such good PR because of the war. They sold off, later on, they sold off the railroad. They became simply known as the Georgia, probably the biggest bank, certainly in Georgia, based in Augusta. So go ahead. These are just a few examples of some paper money, and I just want to add, all transportation companies down south at the time were given special permission to be banks. So you had canal companies and railroads that became the Georgia Railroad and Banking Company. And there's a great check from Augusta, Georgia there, dated 1865. I think it's a little mushed up. There's a canal bank, which there was several canal banks in both Augusta and in New Orleans. And there's a stock certificate from the Georgia Railroad and Banking Company. All beautiful from the standpoint of engraving and value. Now this is the one story I wanted to tell you that made the Georgia so popular after the war. This is well worn, but you can see in fine print it says it's a Confederate Treasury note. And they would honor that note even though it became absolutely worthless when the war ended. It was not worth the paper it was printed on. For several months after the war, that one bank would continue to honor the face value of their Confederate notes, though they had no value. And the other thing that they did is that bank provided free transportation to hundreds of paroled soldiers from Johnston's army. They couldn't afford to get onto the train. I mean, they got one lousy dollar, okay, 30 bucks. You could get a couple of sandwiches along the way trying to get back to Tennessee or Kentucky or Texas. But that railroad company opened its doors and let people take a free ride for months afterwards just to try to get back home. And as a result, again, as I mentioned, they became one of the most powerful banks in the South. And that building that you see on the right was built in 1967. It was when they were at their height, and then they were purchased by Wells Fargo, and they no longer exist. But they have a very direct legacy to the end of the Civil War. Oh yeah, one more piece of script. This is a really lovely, simple little note, also dated from 1862, I think. And this is a Confederate States of America Quartermaster's Department script issued out of Macon, Georgia. And it was to basically get goods and wares up to Richmond for soldiers. But unfortunately, and so many other things that are made of paper, they were basically worthless by the end of the war. So if you didn't cash in your IOUs or your script, after the Confederacy fell, it wasn't worth anything. There's the promissory note. Okay, now, to tell a little bit more of the story, when the treasure train did make it to the end of the line, here's an old railroad car with a Georgia stamped right on the side. We wanted to show you that. This is the way Washington City, as it was referred to, looked at the time of the Civil War, and it probably looked just like that when the wagon train came in. That building that you see there burned down in the 1880s. Becky and I were able to stand on the very site where they were. This is where all the action was when the Union Army caught up to the treasure train and took over Georgia, and they ensconced themselves right there in Georgia and began to process parolees by the hundreds in that town. So the train itself, they took all the money that was left, they took it off at Washington, they put it on a train belonging to the Georgia Railroad. They went to Augusta, where there is a very large arsenal, and the railroad was very powerful because it took armaments and guns, bullets, cannonball from the Augusta arsenal into basically the rest of the South, but Atlanta being the biggest city at the time. So they crisscrossed back and forth. They tried to escape, but every time they made it to a city, the Union Army was already there. And they were being boxed in, and they kept going back and forth and up. They went up into Abbeville again and came back down. And eventually, they gave up the ghost. Now, Jeff Davis made it down to Irwinville, and as I mentioned, Micaiah Clark, he had a boatload of British sovereigns with him. He made it as far as south as Gainesville, Florida. But most of the money and most of the action ended up right there. And we did pay the town a visit. We were able to stand again where that old building was. We talked to people throughout the town, learned about the library, learned about that big old iron chest that had been there since the beginning of time. So anyway, we were there. Go ahead. Okay, Robert Toomes, very powerful fire eater from the South. He lived in Washington. He refused to be paroled. He did not want to become a citizen of the United States. And what I learned by digging really deep is that he avoided arrest. Yeah, he did, and he did manage to get out of the country for quite a time. However, it was always, in everything I read, he was supposed to have received $5,000 in gold tossed over the fence in his house by passing Confederates led by Breckinridge. But what I learned by reading the memoir of the general who was watching over the Union interests in Washington, who had a very unusual name, Lot Abraham. Yeah, Lot Abraham was contacted by Toomes, and Toomes basically said, I've got $5,000 here for you in silver money, and I'd like to give it to you, because otherwise it's just going to be confiscated, and I have plenty of money. I don't want to get in trouble with the authorities. So go ahead, Beck. That's Robert up at the top. That's his home, walking distance from the center of town. Later in life, as a politician, this is Lot Abraham. The two men met. Go ahead. Robert brought a bag full of silver. That's a good example of it's a Carson City silver dollar, which didn't exist until 1870, but I'm going to ignore that part of it. But you could walk in with a huge bag of silver from different denominations, as you can see here. It could have been German, could have been English, but he exchanged that. They had a very nice drink together, according to the memoirs, had a little cigar, money went across the table, and the Union general, was told not to arrest Mr. Toomes. Let him have his freedom in exchange for the $5,000. So Toomes never was arrested. He was able to leave the country safely, and he did it because he basically had $5,000 to pay off the Union to leave without any hassle, basically is what it boils down to. And this is a great example of a money belt. Lots of guys were being made money belts at the time to get the hell out of the country. And gold weighs, I think that Micaiah Clark, when he made some belts in Abbeville, he said that $3,000 in gold would weigh about 15 pounds, and that's about as much as any healthy man, or vigorous man, sorry, could handle for any length of time. So you can see this is not from Robert Toomes, but it was from somebody who was a miner out west. They would sew the individual coins into the belt, so you couldn't just pilfer a belt when the guy was sleeping. And that's, you know, that's the way these guys traveled, with gold and silver coins. I mean, it was not easy, and it wasn't safe. So go ahead. All right, the story goes a little bit further. In May 24th, this is where it's also a little funny, a little dicey. The Union Army gave permission to the Richmond Banks to put all the money into some big wagons. They pretended that they were apple sellers and vendors. I don't know how you could get away with that. You need a huge train like that to pull that much gold, $450,000 in gold that belonged to the banks. They thought it was going to be confiscated. Later, it was either stolen or confiscated, because basically the law reads that if your money has been used or is being contemplated to be used to do harm to the United States of America, we own it, right? And these guys convinced the North for a while that that money was just on a happy train ride down to Georgia from Richmond but was never in the ownership of the Confederate government. It was for a short period of time, and they had forfeited the right to keep that money. But they lost it anyway. Go ahead, Beck. Here's the story. That same night, 20 miles outside of Washington City, along the Savannah River, going back to the pontoon bridge, they camped. Beautiful night in late May, May 24th. The bankers are with them. Everything's hunky-dory, enjoying a nice fire. And all of a sudden, they hear the clatter of cavalry. And suddenly, a group of bushwhackers who claim to be Union, but they're Confederate, show up, and they take as much of that money as they can stuff into wagons, pockets, money bags, the works. Of the $450,000 plus, it's said that about $250,000 in gold these men made off with. Now, it gets weird because they were supposed to have more protection, but an order came down from the Union Army to Lot Abraham to take a train ride with his men to Atlanta for no particular reason that he could figure out, long enough for that poor little train to be raided. And so they were lightly protected, and the money, no one was harmed, but it was a cakewalk to make off with $250,000. And keep in mind that $1 then is worth $25 today, so that was a lot of money at the time. Now, this story lives on in many ways, even the name of the road upon which the theft took place. And a soldier in his late 70s from Tennessee claimed that he was basically there. And I'll get to him in just a moment. And he basically posed the question, well, who snagged all that swag? I'd love to see the term. I mean, swag just means something that's lost or stolen. But I just wanted to get down to here. There's a little private piece of property. People were really hounded after this, but the people that owned that property, they allowed these men to be on their property, the ones that stole the money, and the money was just down the block. And this is basically, I think it's State Road 44 today, but on the maps you'll see it called Graball Road. So when you look it up, it says, well, that's because those Union bushwhackers were supposed to have said, grab all of it you can, boys, the picking's good. And they did. And again, just to define it, slang term for money or goods taken by a thief or burglar. And I'll go on to that next part of the story, Beck. Okay, here's interesting. The family that actually put these guys up, let them stay in their kitchen for one night, said that they were loaded with $50 gold pieces. Now, I hadn't heard very much about $50 gold pieces. Nothing like that was struck in Georgia or in Charlotte. $25 was the largest gold coin I could find by private minters. These all came out of California, and they all were minted before the Granite Lady or the San Francisco Mint was opened. And it was they actually said that these people tried to stuff this money into their boots, into the heels of their boots, anything in any way they could convey hundreds and hundreds of dollars in gold coin. So go ahead, Beck. Yeah, Mrs. Moss, she was 17 years old when the robbery took place, and she witnessed the bushwhackers. She was 75 when they interviewed her in the 1920s. Anyway, she said, yeah, they put up $50 gold pieces into the heels of their boots, and I found a nice shot of genuine Confederate boots, and it's kind of hard to imagine being able to put too many $50 gold pieces in there, but I'm sure they stuffed them in any which way they possibly could. Now, the other thing that the bushwhackers did, they left that family, the Moss family, an entire box that was filled not only with coin, but with private jewelry, watches, rings, and everything I could understand about what that was with that bank at the time, the bank heist. There was a lot of private money. It wasn't just bank money. The banks, when you look at all the transcripts that took place after the war, anything and everything that was owned by anybody that was in one of the big depository banks, they went on board too. And that means that, you know, a box would be stamped Mrs. Becky Rush, and it would just be thrown onto the train as quickly as they possibly could. No one checked the contents. it was her private money, but it was in like a safe deposit box, but it was just in a barrel or a crate, stenciled and thrown onto the train. And these guys were parsing that stuff out as a gratuity for, yeah, you let me stay on your property for the night. Here's $10,000 worth of valuables that we just stole from Richmond. So go ahead, Beck. Okay, here's the guy who I learned all this from. This is a fellow named Lewis Shepard. He was in the Vaughn's Cavalry, which protected the treasure train and Jeff Davis. This is a great depiction out of a book from the 1890s that I found, and quite frankly, that debonair guy there looks a whole lot like that fellow 50 years on to me. He was with Vaughn's Cavalry, and he revealed in the Confederate Veterans magazine in 1917 where all the money actually went, because he was there. So go ahead, Beck. I don't know if, okay, I'll just tell the story. In the book we have a lot more detail, but he basically says 100,000 went with some friends down to Texas. They became great cattlemen. Another 60,000 went to California. 2 guys went to Ohio with $120,000 in gold. So some people got some really nice venture capital out of this deal. They could do anything they want. Other guys were lucky to get a lousy $1 just to get a free train ride. And some of these fellas that knew that train, exactly where that wagon was going to go, and you had only a few guys guarding it, they made off with tens of thousands of dollars and lived good, healthy, happy lives. As a matter of fact, the guy you just saw, Lewis Shepard, in his memoirs, when he was 70-something, he had been a state senator and became a good criminal lawyer. He died doing a case. He always said, I want to die with my boots on. He died in the courtroom doing a defense of some criminal. But the bottom line is, he always had maintained that he did not like being a politician. I think his exact words were, I never liked working with men who had less intelligence than my wife's mule. I thought that was a pretty interesting line. So Lewis Shepard was an interesting guy. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay, Jefferson Davis captured May 10th, 1865, Irwinville, Georgia, near the Florida line. And the thing to keep in mind about little tiny Irwinville is that it was a Union stronghold in the state of Georgia. I have no idea why Jefferson Davis would march into a place where anybody and everybody who could tell the North, oh, here he is. Well, that's exactly what he walked into. And he was arrested, and he had on his person one of the 4 Confederate half-dollars struck in New Orleans, April 1861. They were commemorative coins. Jeff Davis always kept his half-dollar with him. He called it a pocket piece, a vest pocket piece. He always kept it. And I always felt that the man thought of it as a talisman, that it gave him the strength or the vision or whatever it is to lead the Confederacy. That coin today, I think the last one that sold of the 4 went for $1.6 million. And there's some really fascinating stories about where those coins went for decades after the war. Some of them, showed up, they said, in pawn shops. Some of them showed up here and there. One person claimed that they showed up, someone paid for bus fare with one of them. I don't know where these stories came from. All 4 are accounted for now. All of them are safe and sound, but they're extraordinarily valuable. He had the coin on him. It was confiscated by the Union troops from Wisconsin and Michigan when they caught him. And he claims that they took several other items that were dear and near to him. And much later on, in 1879, he was approached by a coin dealer up in New York who wanted to buy one of the restrikes. And he asked, is this one of the genuine coins? Was this your coin, Mr. Davis? And Mr. Davis wrote back and very politely said, I can assure you I once did own that coin, and those Union men took it from me when I was arrested, but I no longer own such a coin, and I cannot represent how authentic that particular coin is. One more story, and I'll make it quick. Believe it or not, there was a guy named Bream out of Gettysburg, or more accurately, Cashtown, Pennsylvania. And he showed up at the age of 65 or 70 in Gettysburg at a coin show in 1936. He had a coin that he said was the very one that Jeff Davis had, that his father knew the man who captured Jeff Davis, And basically they won it in a card game afterwards, or the two men, made a gamble and Daddy won the coin. He walks in, they weigh it, they look at it, they assess it. They said the restrikes were lighter because they'd shaved off the back. Anyway, the bottom line is they said this looks like to be the real deal. And the guy did not like telephones. He did not like communicating too much in public. He worked for the post office in Cashtown. They looked for him from the American Numismatic Society, I believe it was, to do a story about him in 1955, long after 1936. They couldn't find him. Nobody knew anything about him. Becky did some research and found that he had died in 1952. No one knows what happened to that coin. And it's one of those little mysteries of life. I don't see why it wouldn't show up after someone had a card game. You've seen stranger things have happened. Anyway, here's one other thing I'd love to show you. This has not been seen very often. It was a parody of the South's attempt to make money, to print or to design their own coins. In this case, to make fun of everything, they call this the altar of the Confederacy. You can see it's supported by a bale of cotton and a crouching slave, not gold and silver. That's what they believed supported the whole damn thing. The term ex uno plurima means out of one, many, and then up across the top, the centrifugal states of Northern America. So they wanted to make sure everyone thought that they were doing everything possible to destroy the nation, and they put a dunce cap rather than a liberty cap on top of the owl. And on the back, you can see a Southern planter pointing a gun at a Northern banker, and it says, "Oh, ever, pay never." And that's a reference to the fact that the South owed, what, $200 million to the Northern banks when they seceded. So this is the way the North viewed the South. If we ever made a little commemorative coin, that would be kind of interesting, but there it is, 1861, 50 cents. Okay, Beck. This is really interesting. I believe this also came from American Numismatic Society. Yeah. They took, when they captured Davis, apparently they got some more of these old reals in his stuff. And somebody hammered out these silver coins and made these shields that say captured from Jeff Davis, May 10th, 1865. And they do believe that these were given to the cavalry people who captured Jeff Davis. And that's a really cool thing. I have no idea what it's worth. I have no idea where they are, but that was shared by David Hill, I believe it was. Okay, go ahead. Okay, even after Davis is arrested, even after Johnston surrenders and Robert E. Lee surrenders, some of these faithful people continue to keep plowing ahead, hoping that everyone can make it west of the Mississippi into what they call the Trans-Mississippi Department of the Confederacy. And this one guy that I told you about, the faithful Stewart, Micaiah Clark, he went in his own small wagon train of maybe 3 or 4 wagons. He had that large iron chest with him, according to his own account. He had $25,000 in gold European sovereigns. Now, I have no idea where they came from. And he was supposed to divvy those out to the men that he was with, or because he had just become anointed as the acting treasurer of the Confederate States of America, May 4th, the very last thing that Jeff Davis did officially. Poor guy was like in the office for one day, and he goes down to a camp where the Confederates were hanging out near the train. He puts a sign literally on a tree, puts up a little desk, and he says, "This is the Confederate Treasury Department." He gets the authorization to burn all the paper money and all the stocks before the Union catches up with him. I think that was May 5th or 6th. He torches everything. Then he heads south. He's supposed to go first. There was that little town that's in northern Florida that he was trying to make it to. It doesn't matter. He made it as far south as Gainesville. He was hoping to pave the way for his liege, Jeff Davis, to make it. But Jeff got arrested. And what happened basically is the men had a little argument, a little row, because our faithful steward wanted to send all $25,000 overseas to a bank for the day that the South would rise again and Jeff Davis would be the one to give that command. And some other people with him said, hell no, that's never going to happen. We need the money a lot more than some banker over in London. And go ahead, Becky, did we put that slide? We did. I actually found out where all the money went. Since my theme is, where did the Southern dough go? Here's some of it. We have all the individuals that were with this fellow Clark, as some of them, like T.F. Tillman, was actually from Maryland, from a very prominent family in Maryland. And Captain Micaiah Clark, he got himself 400 gold sovereigns at $4.85 per coin, I guess, probably, yeah. Each guy got $55 in traveling expenses, and the cook and the guard got $250, and 5 Negro servants got $20 each. So anyway, you tally it all up. Out of that $25,000, that's $18,900. The rest of it was to go to Verena Davis and her family, since Jeff was on his way to prison. But there's a very precise accounting of where that money went. Now the problem is, these guys just couldn't walk away with their money in their pocket. The minute they wanted to be paroled, the money would be taken from them. So what happened with Clark, he buried the money in a little location, and later, much later, his brother came down, unburied the money, and took it back home for him. But I mean, people had to be very careful with their money. Again, how they got the gold sovereigns, which are the young Victoria, I do not know. They had a lot of connections with, I guess it was Trenholm's office in Liverpool. So yeah, he probably was the one that got the money for them. All right, here's the last story of the day, but it's a good one, I guarantee it. I was sent a notice about this $10 bill, somebody that has been at a show and knows us well. Suddenly, I get an email from this fella who's a coin dealer. It's a $10 bill with handwriting on the back, very old. It was the old iron ink, so it was genuine. And it was basically a eulogy for the South. Turns out it was a lot more well-known than I ever knew, but go ahead, Beck. Okay, this is the note itself. And the way I saw it, the photograph was sent to me. I've actually held that note in my hand by being at a show with this fellow in Harrisburg just a month ago. You can see on the left very clearly that same $10 bill. So this was written on the back of a $10 bill. It was originally written, this whole little eulogy, on the back of a $500 bill in a hotel in Richmond by a soldier who had just surrendered under the command of Joe Johnston. So go ahead, Beck. This is really something. I just took one stanza, and it does echo everything we've been talking about how poor the South was. The Confederate Treasury was poor, not the Richmond Banks. Anyway, the stanza does say, too poor to possess the precious ores, gold and silver, and too much of a stranger to borrow. They could get no credit because they were not recognized as a nation. We issue today our promise to pay and hope to redeem on the morrow. The days rolled by and the weeks became years, but our coffers were empty still. No one was aware that the treasury would quake if a dollar should drop in the till. And that's literally what these guys wrote at the end of the war. That was repeated over and over and over, by the way, for veterans organizations, and people would write different variations of the same thing, which I've seen since. But I've actually had the pleasure of holding that particular one in my hand. It gave me a little bit of a chill, to be honest with you. Okay, Beck, go ahead. This is how we'll wrap it up. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that bill before, but it's very appropriate. I'll tell you the story. Roman goddess of Monita. She is supposed to be, of course, in the simplest terms, she represents money, and she represents security for that money. She is surrounded, in this case, by big chests, just like the one in Washington City, Georgia. Yep, you got it. Money bags at her feet. And this was printed in 1861 in Richmond. And you're going to say, okay, what's the deal? Why do you tell me the tale? Okay. The way that the Romans revered Monita, she was a little bit also a bit of fortuna, a little bit of a fortune, the wheel of fortune. You had to go before her and you had to say, my cause is just and worthy, and I humbly beseech you to get me the money to continue my fight for the good cause. And the Confederate States of America really, really believed in 1861 that they were fighting the good fight. And that's why Monita is on that bill. However, as you can clearly see in that $10 bill that you just saw from 1865, Monita did not smile upon the Confederacy, and if a single dollar were to drop into the till, everything would quake. So my point is, I guess she didn't think that the lost cause was a good cause after all. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Roman mythology at the same time and what the South believed at the time. Okay, Beck, last one. All right, well anyway, we want to thank everybody. We hope we brought some new light to money and the meaning of some of the different kinds of currency and coin and tribute that were given, mementos that were given at the end of the war. And we are always getting more stories from people. I just heard from somebody who interviewed a 95-year-old relative in Georgia, and she actually remembers her father telling her about the treasure train going right by their home. So to this day, I'm getting these stories. That $10 bill, that just came in the last 1 month. So if anybody here or anybody that Dave knows has a story out of Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, we would love to hear it. And I thank you very much.